Welcome back. It is day 41 of our 90-day New Testament reading plan with New Life Youth. My name is Christian. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's reading is Romans 4 through Romans 6. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, chapter 4, Paul continues this conversation about righteousness made through our faith instead of through works. And he really pulls in for this church the reality of Abraham being justified by his faith and not by his works. Many Jews really believed that Abraham had been justified by his works and not his faith. That Abraham was even perfect is what a lot of them were teaching, and had thought that he even kept the law before it was ever even given. The law was given well after Abraham, right? It was given during Moses' time. And so a lot of rabbis taught that Abraham had like an intuition about the law. And this is what had justified him, his keeping the law, this intuition, knowing that the law would be coming and keeping it before it was even officially in place. But Paul is really coming against that teaching here. He is saying, just like all of us, we are counted as righteous by belief or by our faith in God. And when we say we are counted righteous in faith, this is different than being made righteous. We are not righteous officially. We are still being sanctified, being made righteous, but God still counts us as righteous, even though we are still sinful when we put our faith in Him, right? And so that's the idea here. We are counted as righteous in faith, which is different than being made righteous at the time we believe. So it's not one of these things where we pray the sinner's prayer and now we're officially just righteous through and through. We are still being sanctified. Jesus is still the benchmark for our lives. None of us is fully righteous, but because of this faith, because of Jesus' sacrifice, I am now counted as righteous. And we are in the process of sanctification, like we've talked about so many times. And we will all be made fully righteous, I suppose, at the resurrection of the dead when Jesus comes back and for eternity, really, is what we're looking forward to, being made fully righteous at that time. But in the process, right now, we are all being sanctified in the moment, but counted as righteous by God through our faith in Him. And so the reality is, if we focus solely on works, and this is really a continuation from yesterday's teaching into today's reading, is if we focus solely on works, we are trying to do enough to essentially really just like make sure God owes us something. In this case, it would be salvation. I could never do enough works for God to owe me salvation. That's just the reality. This is why grace is necessary. And we need to latch on to grace and understand that is by my faith and not by my works. It's not just faith. Our faith, like we said yesterday, lives in tension with works. My faith drives me to good works, not for blessing or forgiveness, but because of my love for God, right? But here also we have to recognize too, God is not encouraging laziness here within us, right? If we interpret it as, okay, God's okay with laziness, that my faith is it, now I don't have to do anything else for the rest of my life. Well, we miss the point then too, right? And so we are going to see time and again faith and works working together. I think there's a tremendous amount of importance here for the Jews who are listening as well in regards to this pulling in of Abraham and David into this conversation about being made righteous through our faith. Abraham, he is the father of our faith. He is the father of many nations, right? So Jews and Gentiles alike can look to him and say, hey, father of many nations, right? David also, ancestor in Jesus's line, a well-known figure for the Jews. And while Abraham was seen as blameless because of his works, David, his mistakes are well known, right? We know that he had sinned, that he had messed up. If someone would be considered unrighteous based on their works, David would have fallen into that category. He would definitely been in that conversation. No sinner, try as hard as we may, can ever carry his own sin away. There's just not enough good works we could do to carry away our own sin. It's just not possible. And so this idea of works on its own for righteousness is an uphill battle that we can never win. We just could never win that battle. And so bringing David and Abraham into this conversation is so important for the Jew. Paul is circling back on this idea even of circumcision in regards to Abraham. And why does he keep coming back to this idea of circumcision? Why does he even bring in why does Paul bring in David or Abraham into this conversation? The reason would be that these are some stumbling blocks for the Jews, right? These are hiccups for them that they just cannot seem to get past, especially as it came to trying to welcome Gentiles into the faith as Christians or converts. This idea that it's not about works, it's not about physical circumcision or the things on the outside that count us as righteous. It is faith alone. And so we've talked plenty about that, but the idea of bringing Abraham and David into this conversation, I think, is just so important for the Jews to be hearing this, eye-opening for them, I'm sure. Now, Paul goes on to tell us as well, suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope. When I come to this, I'm just so struck by a few things. I mean, an athlete needs to go through physical stress to gain endurance, to gain strength, to improve in their craft. A sailor needs to go out to rough seas to gain experience, right? They just can't, they don't become good sailors by sitting on the shore. Soldiers have to go through battle. They have to train and get ready in order to be able to go through that battle. For Christians, tribulation, trial, suffering, that is just a natural part of our life. And the problem is that many Christians want a life free of tribulation. And I would think most actually would like, I mean, that'd be nice, a life without tribulation, without trial, just a easy peasy life. I get it. Many Christians want a life free of tribulation and trial. And hey, I get that. Who wants to go through trials? Who wants to go through suffering or tribulation? None of us really want to go through suffering. But the idea here is that when suffering comes, when trials come, we have to wrap our head around this reality that these are moments for us in our walk with God of refinement. I feel like we've talked about this before maybe as well too, about being refined by fire. But if I want courage, man, I want hope. Like I want those things. I want a good character, but that oftentimes comes at the cost of going through a trial or going through suffering on some level. And the question is, am I going to persevere through that with a good attitude? Will I develop the perseverance to have a good attitude when I go through those? What is my posture? What does my attitude speak towards walking through those trials? That's always the question. Sometimes it does suck. It does suck going through those trials, through those tribulations. But this is the maturation process of the believer. We have to be able to walk through those things. And really, I think that too many believers latch onto the idea that following Jesus, it will be easy to some degree, but then also that there's this guarantee of a lack of trials, of a lack of suffering, that things are going to always work out the way we want them to, that life will be perfect. But that is not the case. But I think a lot of young believers, immature believers, latch onto that idea that buying into Jesus is going to give them this level of protection from suffering and trials. And that's just not how it works. I actually, the problem with that mentality is that when things don't go their way or our way, then deconstruction from faith typically happens. And so we have to be able to wrap our head around that idea that suffering and trials, that while walking through them, it can be awful, can be difficult, can be frustrating. It is building something in us to become more like Christ, perseverance, character, hope, and a hope that won't disappoint. And it doesn't mean that our life is going to be all trials, all suffering, all tribulation, right? I just know there's going to be good seasons. There's going to be bad seasons. There's going to be difficult things we walk through, and we have to walk through those things. I watched an interview pretty recently, and not the whole interview, but parts of it, with George Janko and this comedian named Pete Holmes. And Pete shares some of his story as a former believer and how he deconstructed from faith, why some of the reasons he deconstructed from his faith. And so much of it just has to do with this reality that he did not understand this idea of growing in perseverance through suffering. When trials came, when tribulation came, there was a disconnect there. A lot of people go through struggles, and it is too much so that they would abandon their faith because of the struggle. And here's the reality. It's going to sound so harsh for us. And this is not directed at either of these gentlemen, but the reality is, as believers, we do need to grow some sort of backbone. We need to grow a backbone. And that sounds probably rude and blunt to say, but there is truth to it, that as believers, we need the backbone to be able to walk through this suffering, to walk through the trials, because those are going to cultivate good things in us. And there is even a direct connection of why or what we were talking about, and growing past this mentality of being justified by works. Because if our mindset, and to what I'm talking about here about having that backbone of going through the trials, if our mindset is that I am justified by works, then my relationship with God becomes very transactional. If that is the case, if my relationship with God is transactional, then when difficult seasons come, I am much more likely to throw in the towel when those difficult seasons arise. I say, well, if my works haven't gotten me a pass on this, then I might as well throw in the towel. I might as well stop believing, because I've done the good work, so I should get a pass on these difficult seasons. But my good works don't get me a free pass from trial or difficulty. God is not this mob boss or mafia boss, and we are not paying dues for protection. That's just the reality. We're not paying dues for protection. If I have works but not faith, then I won't survive when tribulation comes. There's a direct connection there to what Paul is talking about. It almost seems like a weird placement when you, at first glance, I think that talking about perseverance and trials and tribulations and perseverance coming, and hope and good character. But there's a direct connection here to faith and works and walking through these trials. They go hand in hand. And so if I have works but not faith, I'm not going to survive the tribulation when it comes. Faith goes along with works, and when they are living in the correct tension together, I can walk out now these trials and these tribulations and move into perseverance, build character. I can grow into the hope. A lot of what we're talking about here, this is just a continuation from yesterday, just the faith conversation in these first 2 days of Romans. There's definitely more to talk about in these chapters besides this, but this is just what's really, really sticking out to me. And this idea that as Christians, as believers, we sometimes need to grow a backbone. We need to bear down, and we need to walk through these seasons of tribulation, understanding it's not my works that are buying me a ticket. It is my faith in Jesus. And because of my faith in Jesus, I am now going to walk out the trials and tribulations and difficult seasons. That's just a reality of what we have to walk through. And so there's a lot in these chapters we haven't touched on, but we do need to grow in this tension of faith and works, so when tribulation and trials do come, that we can walk those out well. We can walk out the suffering well, and we learn to live in that tension. So like I said, so much more we want to talk about here, but we really just don't have time for all the things we want to talk about. So let us know, what are you learning in the comments? Let us know here on YouTube in the YouVersion Bible Plan, and we hope to see you tomorrow.